afraid of death. Let me tell you what I mean by that. You know, death is the final stop, if you will, and it guides so many people's decisions in life because we think I have to do all of these things in life, accomplish all of these goals in my life, become a certain standing in life before my death. And warrior saints, do not let the day of our death stop us from living a crucifixional life. I don't mean to say that we don't fear death. Obviously, if you are standing on the top of a 50-story building and looking over the edge and seeing that drop, it's kind of scary. And you know that if you do something silly or you slip, that you will indeed meet your untimely death. And that's a frightful thing. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm referring to is the fear that we have of death that prohibits us from living a lifestyle. You see, we have been called, warrior saints have been called to get stuff done, to do the things that God has asked us to do and contribute to the world in a positive way, to make an impact, right? Like, in other words, warrior saints are supposed to do things that impact the world in positive ways for the glory of God's name and for the betterment of themselves, and most importantly, the betterment of others. There's a new monster out there that has caused so much fear of not getting dead that sometimes we may stop offering that contribution, stop living that lifestyle, stop being crucifixional so that we can contribute to the world. That new monster, you all know, is COVID-19. And I am not saying that we should not be afraid of COVID and the possibility that if we contract the virus, that some terrible things might happen to us, including death. I'm not saying that we shouldn't wear masks. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be physically distant. I'm not saying that we shouldn't take all of the necessary protocols to be safe. Look, when you get in a car, you put on your seatbelt, right? You don't want to die if you have an accident. And likewise, with COVID-19, we should protect ourselves with all of the protocols that are in place until such time as we find a way as a people to eradicate this virus once and for all. What I do mean is that we are not so afraid of it that it prohibits us from living crucifixionally. That's the challenge that warrior saints have to overcome. So do you see the nuance I'm saying? They're like, okay, be afraid. Like, if you get it, you could get sick and you could, God forbid, possibly die from it. I mean, people have, right? But having that fear of dying is not something that should ever stop you, warrior saints, from going to get some. Like, you have to do what you're supposed to do. You have to do what you're called to do. You can't let anything get in the way of doing that. Look at it like this. Okay, so far, and I didn't look at statistics this morning, but COVID-19 has killed about 300,000 plus, right? Like, that's a lot of people, 300,000 people. And assuming that's a legitimate number, it's not padded, that's a considerable amount of people. However, heart disease takes 660,000 lives a year, right? Like, it's more than double. Now, we don't stop eating steaks and eating cheeseburgers and candy and all that stuff that might lead to our heart disease, as Americans especially. We know that it's there. Some of us have struggled with it. Some of us have even known people who have died from heart disease. But the idea of heart disease does not prohibit us. Well, let's say this. The idea of heart disease should not prohibit us from living a crucifixional life and making that contribution. You see it. Like, it's there. It's more likely sorry, I hate to sound crass, but it's more likely to kill either or any of us than COVID is, right? And yet we still don't allow heart disease to take us away from doing the business we've got to do. That's the message I want to give about COVID. We can't let COVID take us from doing the business that we're supposed to do. That's the message. And look, lockdowns and quarantines and all the rest of the stuff that's going on are, partially truly set up for protection, for keeping us safe. But I think that they're partly established and implemented to take us off our game, to take us away from other people, to lock us away in our homes so that we become kind of like sheep and do whatever we're told to do. This is something we have to be cautious of, to be mindful of, to be very careful of. And we turn now to Scripture, as we always do, this beautiful text in Hebrews, which we heard yesterday in the Orthodox Church, this selection from Hebrews chapter 11, we read yesterday in all of our worship services around the world. And in the story, the author of Hebrews is talking about faith And he's saying that because these guys and gals throughout the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, their history, they trusted and believed in God, they were able to do amazing things. They didn't let the fear of all the monsters that were in their life prohibit them from being crucifixional. You see it. And he talks about things like how the Israelites, when they were taken out of Egypt, they were running from the Egyptians who wanted to conquer them. This multitude of Egyptians, so numerous, that God opens the sea. They went through the Red Sea and the water comes back on top of the Egyptians. The meaning of that story is that in their fear of being conquered and recaptured and oppressed by the Egyptians, they didn't waver from doing what they were supposed to do and follow God. You understand? And Hebrews continues with these words. I'm going to read them, just hear them, listen to them. After he talks about the Red Sea, he says, "And what more shall I say? For time would fail to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel, and the prophets." So he's saying to us, like, this was one story, but there's a gazillion stories of all of these other heroes who, in spite of the monsters that may have been coming after them, some of them even more ferocious than COVID-19, they did not waver. They did not stop living the life they were supposed to, and they went forward to conquer and do whatever it was that God has asked them to do. And as a result of that, some of them suffered, some of them died. Listen to these words. Through their faith, they conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, received promises, stopped the mouths of lions. All great stuff. But then it takes a twist. They quenched raging fire. They escaped the edge of the sword. They won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, and put foreign armies to flight. Forgive me. Now it takes a twist with 35. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, that they might rise to a better life. Others suffered mocking and scourging and chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, and ill-treated, right? So it went for those fierce warriors of God. They were not afraid to expose their life, to extinguishing their life for the cause that they were placed on earth to do. Do you understand that? Like, yeah, they were probably afraid, but they weren't going to let that fear stop them, even, God forbid, at the expense of their lives. Do you understand that? And that's what warrior saints have to keep in mind. I don't want you to die ever, but we all know that that's going to happen, right? So let's be honest and real about it. Are you going to make the life you live here count, or are you just going to do whatever you can to protect and preserve so that you don't get dead by COVID? Do you understand? Like, I don't want you to get dead by COVID either. Nobody does. That's a terrible thing. But I also don't want you to sacrifice or compromise the role, the mission, the goal of your life for the sake of the fear of COVID. Do you understand? The nuances here. Protect yourself from this virus. Do those things that you need to do. If you feel compelled and trust in the vaccine, do it, right? But don't let any of those fears stop you from doing the right thing, even if that means you might die, right? That's a tough statement, but it's a real statement, and it's something that we have to keep in mind. Now, look, how do we get through all that and come to an understanding like that? What are you talking about? Well, there's always, for warrior saints, one true role model, one person who did the business perfectly, and that, of course, is Christ himself. As you flip the page in Hebrews to chapter 12, you hear some pretty powerful stuff, like actually amazing stuff. And it's a call to you and I to follow. Listen to these words. We're going to put them up on your screen. This is chapter 12, Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight. Like, beautiful. Like all these Old Testament guys and gals that he's referred to in Hebrew, they're with us. They're images. They're what's the word I'm looking for? Examples for us, mentors, role models by which to live our life. So with that, seeing that those guys and gals did God's work and listened to his commandments and conquered, even at the expense of their lives, they still conquered. That for us is a great witness. With that in mind, be comforted. Let the heaviness, the burden, set it aside. And let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. All right, there you go, warrior saints. All right. You got all these role models and examples who did it and proved it to us. Now you do it. You've been given a race to run. Persevere, baby. Keep going. Keep going. Don't you ever quit, right? That's what it says. And then you ask, well, okay, I'm in. How do I do that? Glad you asked. Read verse 2. Looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Boom. There you go. How do I do it? Look to Jesus. He's the first, and he perfected it. He did it the right way. Who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising and shame. To live crucifixional is to look at Jesus, to do what he did, the pioneer and the perfecter. What did he do? He went to the cross. His mission was so important that he was willing to voluntarily offer his life. Do you understand? Even death would not prohibit Christ from fulfilling his mission. Even the fear of death, which we see in the Garden of Gethsemane, would not stop Christ from fulfilling his mission. Now, interestingly enough, his death conquers the greatest of all the monsters, death itself. But he's saying, you look to that way of behaving, being willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish your mission, even at the expense of your own life if need be. Christ ends somewhere really pretty cool. We talked about the empty tomb for sure, but listen to the rest of verse 2. I'm going to read it all again and hear the end. Where does he end up, if you will? Look to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Boom. You follow that, warrior saints. Like Christ conquered the greatest of all the monsters. He fulfilled his mission. And by doing so, he ends up where? At the right hand of God, the throne of God, seated in the kingdom. And that's the promise that's made to you and I, that if we live our life in a crucifixional fashion, following Jesus, who is the pioneer and the perfecter, and doing what he did, and enduring crosses in our own lives, not being unafraid, but being unwilling to let any fear stop you from fulfilling your goal and your mission and your ministry and your calling, if you won't let anything stop it and live a crucifixional life, then just as Jesus went through the cross and death, into the empty tomb, ultimately to be seated at the right hand of God, so will you. That's the message. He showed us that way works, and then he says, follow me. That's it. And so now the challenge is, all right, you want to be a warrior saint? You got to follow him. How do you follow him? You got to live a crucifixional life. How do you do that? Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes that's hard. And that's why we created the way of the warrior saint. That's the whole where I'm going today. All of it is to say, the most important thing that we have been called to do is to be crucifixional in our lives, to imitate Christ. That's it. That's what we've been called to live a Christ-like life, however you want to say it. And you can do that whether you're an attorney or a doctor or a mom or a garbage collector or someone who works at a grocery store or someone who's older and retired. It doesn't matter. You can follow Christ by living a crucifixional life. Sometimes doing so is challenging, and we're here to guide to help you do that. We have this beautiful ministry that we set up. It's mind-blowing how awesome it is. We call it the Way of the Warrior Saint, and it's designed to help us follow the life of Christ, right? If you visit warriorsaints.org, you can subscribe and join us. It's so easy to do, and it's so fun to do. The Way of the Warrior Saint is just like a library filled with video teaching. So instructions kind of like this, but much more fun, much more creative, with actual practical tools that you can implement into your life immediately. And just you can start picking up the crucifixional life and off to the races. It's really simple to do. All you got to do is visit us at warriorsaints.org and subscribe for the Way of the Warrior Saint. $8 a month. Come on, Gina. That's like 2 lattes. Come on, you can do that, right? Like it's really, and it's a fabulously growing movement. We have gotten so much positive feedback. I'm humbled. I'm actually like totally humbled because God is good, way, way good. And we just show up. The Warrior Saints team just shows up to do the business, to do what God has asked us to do. And he's making things happen. And the movement grows each and every day. And it's time for you to be a part of it and join us. The reason why we want all of that is very simple. Could you imagine? I'll end with this today. Imagine if there was a huge army of warrior saints who were all fighting to do God's will, in spite of any fear of any monster, whether it be COVID or heart disease or car crashes or anything else. If we were all fighting to do God's will, in spite of any fear that we may face, how different would the world be? How much better could the world be? That's the call. That's the challenge. That's what you and I have been called to do in whatever fashion it may be. So let's do it. Let's do it together. It is time because we need you. That's the bottom line. We need you. God needs you to step up and do the business. We're here to help you find out how and what that is. We love you, beautiful people. We will be back again tomorrow to continue our crucifixional live stream. And until then, keep walking on the way of the warrior saint.